My name is Brent. I'm an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date of August 27th, 1996. I have a sponsor and I have a home group. And to me, those are very important. For one, it makes me be accountable. Two, I don't care if you got 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. You need a sponsor. You need somebody else that you can talk to bounce things off of. And that's very important to me. We set up a nightly inventory that we do, and then we speak at least twice a week on the phone if we can't do it in person. So I'm going to share a little bit about who I used to be, what happened to my life because of this disease, and where I am today because of this program of AA. I do not spend a lot of time on my Drunkalog. We've all been down the road, whether it's to the left, to the right, or through the ditches, but I'll let you know a little bit about how I started, and then more about what this disease did to me and where I am today because of the program. I took my first drink when I was 9. Alcoholism runs pretty rampant in my families. Neither one of my grandfathers made it to the age of 60, and my uncle died at the age of 42 of alcoholism. It was fairly easy for me to get alcohol growing up. I grew up in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Southwest Missouri and hated pretty much every moment of my childhood. I had no brothers and sisters, and I was 22, 23 miles from many of my friends. Now, most people automatically say, well, if you was an only child, you had everything, you were spoiled. I'm not going to sit there and argue with anyone. I probably was spoiled. On the flip side, though, when you don't have a brother and sister, if any chores are not done, if something gets broken around the house, you also don't have anybody else to blame it on. So there's kind of some pros and cons both ways. But growing up out in the country, I just never developed a way of fitting in. When I would go to school, I just felt uncomfortable. I just didn't feel like part of the group. I didn't feel like kids wanted to play with me when we was at recess and so forth. And I learned when I take that little sip of alcohol, I get that little burning sensation down in my stomach, and it would change the way I thought about myself. It would change the way I felt, and I would think people would like me more. Growing up in a small town, drinking was pretty prevalent, so it was pretty easy for me to do that. Growing up on a farm, I pretty much idolized my father. My dad was not the type of man that gave out compliments, didn't give you that pat on the back. And my childhood, I craved that. I wanted that approval from him. I wanted him to tell me he was proud of me. I wanted him to tell me that I was doing things the way he wanted me to do them. And that just wasn't who my dad was. I guess growing up, I was probably a little bit better than average in sports. I played ball with the older guys. They would move me up. Again, I didn't fit in with kids my own age. So when I played ball with the older guys, I thought I had to do a little bit crazier stuff so they would accept me. So my drinking started escalating a little bit. And I look back on it now, and probably all I was the butt of their jokes because I'd get drunk and do stupid stuff. Then they'd laugh at me. Going through school, my dad was the type of person I'd bring home a B. He wanted to know why it wasn't an A. I'd bring home an A. He said, well, that's the reason you go to school. And that was pretty much my childhood. It was like whatever I did, it wasn't quite enough for him to be proud of me. And I always tried to strive for that pat on the back. By the time I was 13, 14, I was sneaking and stealing alcohol out of my grandpa's or the family or whatever, so I could drink more because I sure wasn't able to buy it at that point in time. And my drinking was starting to escalate. It wasn't out of control by no means, just because I couldn't get a hold of it. But I was drinking any time that I could. I'll fast forward to when I was 16 years old. There was 5 carloads of us that went on a float trip. The lead car ended up having a wreck on the way back, and one of the girls was killed. Her parents and my parents had known each other before Joe and I was ever born. Her parents asked me to be one of the pallbearers, and my way of dealing with anything that I didn't like or I didn't want to face or I didn't want to talk about was just to drink. So the morning of the funeral, I pretty much was drunk and I stumbled carrying the casket, nearly fell, and pretty much made a real ass out of myself. And that was the first time I had people come up to me after the funeral and tell me I needed to slow down on my drinking. My drinking was getting out of control. And my attitude to them was real simple. It's like, I'm fine. This is how I deal with it. So just leave me alone. Um, by the time I was a junior in high school, I was pretty much drinking on a daily basis, maybe not a lot, but I was either snagging it, stealing it, or having somebody get it for me. And it was just the same cycle with my dad. I just couldn't get him to give me that pat on the back and that approval. My junior year, we had probably one of the better ball teams we'd ever had in my high school. We ended up making it to the quarterfinals in state. We ended up losing, but I did play one of the better games I'd ever played in my career at that point in time. And I thought that my dad would be proud of me, even though we ended up losing. When I got home, all I could hear from him was, I should have done this. If I'd have done this, maybe we'd have won. If I'd have done things this way, I could have scored some more points. So it was to the point that I was just accepting that whatever I did, I was never going to be enough for him. By the time I graduated high school, I figured I'd be pretty much like everybody else in my little small town. I'd move out, get a home, end up getting married, raise a family, live there, died there like everybody else does. Well, my dad had different plans. My dad wanted me to go to college. Well, I hated school when I was in high school. So the last thing I thought about doing was going to college. So that summer, when all my friends were getting their own place, getting an apartment, getting a home, whatever it was, I was just stuck there waiting to go to school. So that summer came and went, and I ended up going to college that fall. And I will have to admit, it probably took me about 3 to 4 days on campus. I joined a fraternity, and I realized I just might have fell into paradise because alcohol was flowing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I didn't have to worry about where I had to get it. I didn't have to be 21, and I was in heaven. And my drinking absolutely exploded at this point in time. I will reference that at this point in my life, drugs did play a huge factor, but I'm going to concentrate my story tonight on AA because that is still by far my drug of choice. My freshman year, somehow I made grades. I'm not sure how. And it was the same story with my dad. I'd bring home a B. He wanted to know why it wasn't an A. I did bring home a couple of A's, and he said, well, that's the reason I'm sending you to school. As I got to my sophomore year, my drinking was really getting out of control. People were telling me they didn't want to ride with me when we'd go out. I started losing friends. I will tell you this. I feel I'm pretty brutally honest about my story. There's a lot of things that I will tell you tonight that I am not proud of. I still deal with the shame and guilt. But my sponsor told me if I was going to share my story and I was going to lay it out there, that I just need to lay everything out there. One of the things I am not very proud of is at this point in time in my life, my relationship with women was real simple. If you like to drink, you like to party, you like to have sex, we hung out. You didn't, I went and found someone else who would. And that's just pretty much how I treated women at this point in time in my life. My drinking, like I said, at this point was getting out of control. People did not want to ride with me. I started getting new sets of friends. When I would run through them, I would get another set of friends. And I still don't know how, but somehow I made grades. I ended up graduating, got a job, got my degree. I'm out working. People was telling me I need to slow down, and I'm telling everybody, I've graduated, I got a job, I'm paying my bills, I have no issues, I have no problems. Why don't you all just get off my back? But then about a year out, when I was working, my mom called and said that my dad was getting older. He was having some issues on the farm, and she was wondering if there's any way I could come home and help out for a little while. So I made arrangements at work, got a week off, came home, had a list of jobs, list of things that needed to be done. That first morning, he needed the barn painted. So I grabbed my beer, headed out to paint the barn. And in my mind, I see all the paint he's bought, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, I can paint the barn. I don't need all that paint. I'll save him some money. We'll get the week started off on the right foot, and hopefully things will go well. When I got done, he came out. He didn't tell me I did a good job. He didn't tell me I did a bad job. He just asked me why I didn't use all the paint. I said, well, I didn't need all the paint, got the job done, and I saved you some money. He said, well, if I wanted to save the money, I wouldn't have bought it. Well, you might say 25 years of me trying to get that pat on the back, 25 years of alcohol filled that void for a while. And at this point in time in my life, it wasn't filling it. It didn't matter how much I put inside me. I could not close up that hole in my heart and inside my soul. And things come to a head that day. My father and I proceeded to get into extreme heated argument, and I murdered him. I will never know what I did to my mother. She stood by me from day one. And if any of you know anything about a small town, talk and gossip could be worse than anything else. And my mom dealt with it for everything and for the rest of her life. You might think, I've had people ask me, they said, well, that's probably your rock bottom. And you started changing your life after that. Well, that wasn't my rock bottom. I still got a little ways to go before I get there, because she bailed me out. And 3 days later, my first night home, I was drinking again. And I proceeded to drink for the next 10 months till I went to court. My attorney, people tell me I shouldn't be drinking. I need to be changing my ways. I need to be doing this. I need to be going to some meetings. I need to be showing the people that I'm trying to change. And my attitude's, I'm just fine. Went to court 10 months later. I was convicted of second-degree murder, armed criminal action. I was given 2 life sentences. On October 3rd, 1987, I was sent to prison. It took me approximately 12 to 13 days in prison to learn how to make homemade wine, and I proceeded to do that, and that was my hustle when I was in prison. I drank so I didn't have to deal with the emotions. I didn't have to deal with the guilt. I didn't have to deal with anything, and it took me out of my misery. Now, my mother and my grandmother stood by me, like I said, from day one. Every Thursday, they drove 2.5 hours to come visit me in prison. And I don't care if it was in August and 103 outside, or if it was in January and there was 9 inches of snow, they made that trip to come visit me. And when I had that homemade wine and I had something inside me to where I didn't have to deal with reality, when I'd get called into the vision room to see them, I would give them a hug. I told them how happy I was that they come to see me. I thanked them for bringing me a little bit of change so I could get something to eat. I told them that I loved them, and we had some great visits. Then on January the 1st, 1992, I woke up in my cell floor, in my own blood, my own puke. The homemade wine I'd been making was literally eating my stomach lining out. But I still refused to admit that I was an alcoholic. I was going to do like I'd done everything else in my life. I would take care of things. So I proceeded just to quit drinking. I wasn't going to admit I was an alcoholic. I was just going to quit drinking. And I really believe those next 3+ years, I might have been the most miserable dry drunk there was. And for an example of telling you how I was, that guy who was so grateful that his mom and grandmother would come see him and told him he loved them and thanked him for coming. During those 3+ years when I was a dry drunk, they still come to see me. And my attitude was a lot different, because I would look down at my watch and I'd ask them, where the hell you been? The visiting room opened 22 minutes ago and I've been waiting. That's all the money you brought me? I'll have that eaten up in an hour. I can't believe you didn't think of me to bring more. And I'm pretty sure there were some days that I didn't even tell them I loved them and didn't thank them for coming to see me. And that's kind of who I was to get through those miserable years. Now, anyone who goes to prison, you try to drag every human being, the dog, neighbors, you'll try to drag anybody in there with you just so you're not alone. At the time, I was seeing a lady and I would try to drag her and 2 daughters in with me. Well, That lasted about 18 months, longer than I would have waited for her. I can tell you that right now. And she told me that she had to go her own way. We filed the paperwork and she took off with the girls. I give her credit. I probably wouldn't have lasted that long because I'm pretty selfish. People will tell you that you don't make friends in prison. Everybody's this, everybody's that. I'm not going to sit here and tell anybody about their opinion, but I had a couple guys that I had a job with. We played ball. We did a few things with in there, and they talked to me one night and they said, "You know what, Brent?" Said, "You're an alcoholic." I said, "How am I an alcoholic? I haven't had anything to drink in over 3 years, guys." They said, "No, you're an alcoholic." Well, at this time, I was pretty miserable in my life, and I was very egotistical, and I was very self-centered because everything was revolving around me. I hated my life, and I hated them telling me what I was when I knew that was not what I was. And after about 2 weeks, I finally just confronted them, and I said, "You two just need to get off my case, or what do I have to do for you to get off my case? Because I'm sick and tired of you telling me what I am when I'm not." They said, "You go to an AA meeting, we'll leave you alone." I said, "I go to one meeting and you two will never say anything to me again, and this is all said and done." They said, "Yeah. Well, in prison, you have to sign up on a list, and it takes a couple of weeks to get on the list, and you have to wait because they only let so many people in the room. And when there was an opening, I finally got called out one Sunday night. So I went to the meeting. The two guys held the word. They didn't say anything to me. I walked straight to the back of the room. It was a long, narrow tables. I sat in the back corner, pretty much sat with my head down the whole time, wondering when those 60 minutes was going to get over. When they were done, I said nothing to no one, not really sure everything that was said in the meeting. And I'm pretty sure I tripped over at least one chair getting out of the room, and it was done and it was over. And the only thing I can tell anyone who will ever listen to me for the rest of my life is something happened to me that night. Because those two guys had the word, they didn't say a word to me. That following Sunday night, I went back to that room. And I sat in that same damn chair in that corner, and I looked down and talked to myself for 60 minutes, asking myself, why am I back here? What am I doing? And I proceeded to do that for 3 months and never said a word to anybody. And finally, one night at the meeting, I looked up and I looked around the room, and I realized these guys were talking about me. They talked about how they didn't fit in. They talked about how they had this void inside their heart and soul that they could not get full. They talked about how, you know what, for a while, alcohol was awesome. Had some great times, had some phenomenal laughs, had great memories, and then alcohol quit working. Alcohol didn't take that misery away. It just compounded the misery. They talked about how they didn't fit in. They talked about their dad. They talked about their grandparents. I looked around the room, and I don't care if they were black, white, Asian. We were all talking about the same thing. So I thought maybe I need to pay a little bit of attention, because for some reason I'm coming back to this room. I checked out that little thing you all call the big book at that point in time, and I took it back to my cell. I'd read a little bit of it, and I thought, you know what, that's pretty cool. I like that. Then I'd read a little bit more, and I didn't like it because it talked about me, and I'd throw the book over on my bunk and I wouldn't touch it for 2 or 3 days. And I proceeded to do this for about a year. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with prison and AA, but it's people just like yourselves in Missouri. They're called volunteers in corrections. They have to come inside the prison for us to have an AA meeting. So 3 gentlemen who were bringing the meetings in actually sat down, put together a big book workshop. And it was 15 weeks long, and they were going to walk us through the steps. And you had to sign this contract with the prison that stating that you wasn't going to go out and play ball, or you wasn't going to go on a visit, or you wasn't going to do this on this one night each week that we did this. So I signed up. I said, what the heck? I don't have anything else to lose. And I agreed to it and went there that first night. And they're wanted to make sure everybody had a big book. And then they started handing out this paperwork and everything. And I'm looking through it. And right then and there, I realized I'd totally lost my mind, because I hated school when I was in school. I've sent myself to prison. They're handing out homework, and I've got to do homework to go to some place that I'm not even sure I'm an alcoholic to help me better myself to get through it. And I said, I have lost my mind. But I really did change my mind because those 15 weeks changed who I was. For the first time in my life, I admitted that I was an alcoholic. For the first time in my life, I realized I was sitting in prison because of me. It wasn't my dad's fault. It wasn't the sheriff's fault for arresting me. It wasn't the judge and jury's fault for sending me to prison. It wasn't the prosecutor's fault for prosecuting the case. I was responsible for where I was at. And over the next few months, I would actually get up 15 minutes early before count time. And I'd read out the daily reflection, and I'd just grab a section of the big book. Everyone talked about those first 164 pages, and I'd just read a couple paragraphs. Not necessarily in order. I'd just read wherever the book fell open that morning. And I started feeling a little bit different. Didn't understand what was going on. I was just feeling a little bit different. And they talk about in the big book, and I'm not this great guy on what page and all this, but they talk about in the big book how other people will see changes in us before we see them in ourselves. And I want to show you an example of that. When I was on a visit one day, I'd been probably about going on 2.5 years of going to AA meetings. And my grandmother was in the visiting room, and she said, "It's so good to see my grandson." And I'm sitting here in the back of my mind going, "You see me every week, Grandma. What are you talking about?" But I didn't say anything. I said, "What do you mean, Grandma?" And she goes, "It's good to see my grandson again." I said, "Well, we see each other each week." And she says, "No." She goes, "My grandson has light behind his eyes now." So she was seeing changes happening in me before I even realized what was going on. She said my attitude was different. She said I talked different. She said I started being happy and looking for positive things in life instead of always being the negative. And I was extremely grateful because my grandmother passed away long before I got out of prison. I was able to make amends to her. And I am so thankful for that. Now, if anybody knows anyone in prison, or God forbid you've been in prison, you know if you get mail, that's pretty precious, because most of us who go to prison, we burn every bridge there was. Our family, our friends definitely don't want anything to do with this. And sometimes our family gets sick and tired of dealing with this too. But I got a letter one night, and I pretty much froze in my track because that woman that I told you she had to leave, I got a letter from her. Well, I was so scared and so full of fear of what was in that letter. I figured there's going to be this long laundry list of stuff. But you did this to me, and you ruined my life, and you did this to the girls, and you did this and that. So I threw it on my desk, and being the great alcoholic that I am, I came up with about 3,421 scenarios of what was in that letter. And after day 3, I finally figured out that I need to read that letter, or I'm going to drive myself totally crazy. So I opened the letter up. It was pretty easy, pretty simple. She says, "Would you please give me a call?" Well, I knew I wasn't going to wait 3 days for that to happen. So I went down the next time we could get on the phone, got in line, made the phone call. And I said, "What do you want?" And she said, "Are you still on my visiting list?" Now, automatically, most human beings would take that as a great sign that somebody wants to come visit you, but not this alcoholic. The first words out of his mouth was, "Why?" She goes, "I'd like to come visit you." Again, most people would be pretty excited. And again, I said, "Why?" She said, "I was talking to your mom, and she said you've been making some changes in your life. She goes, I'd like to come see you." So she came to visit me. And I'm kind of ashamed to say this, but for the first time in my life, at the age of 36 years old, I sat down and carried on conversations with a woman, and I didn't have an ulterior motive. It wasn't like, how much money have I got to spend to take her out to dinner tonight? What movie we got to go sit through because I don't want to see it, but this is the only thing she's been talking about for a month. How much liquor have I got to get so I can get just enough in me that I'm happy? I can get her loosened up so when we get back home, we can have sex and we ain't got to argue about it. There was nothing. It was just conversation. And it was the first time I'd carried on a conversation with a woman without anything else being around. And we proceeded to do this for almost a year, 10 months. And for whatever reason, this lady wanted to marry me. She wanted to go down this road with me again. And we renewed our vows in the visiting room, and she stuck with me for the next 13 years till I got out of prison. I went up to parole that first time, and I'm the good out recovering alcoholic, and I'm so egotistical, and I'm like, the parole board's going to see how I've made all these changes, and I got my family back, and I'm doing good, and all this stuff. And I went to the parole hearing, lasted about 6 minutes, and they said, Mr. Huff, we'll see you in 5 years. I walked out of that room and I cussed God. I cussed this AA program. I told it all to go to hell. I said, this is a bunch of crap. I got on the phone with her. I told her to divorce me, to get up out of my life, to move on down the road. I'm never going home. This is stupid. And I proceeded to do this for 3 nights on the phone. And she just cut me off and interrupted me. And she said, are you done? Now, I've heard that tone of voice before, so I knew that I better answer this correctly. And I said, I can be. And she says, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to get through this. So let's just move on. If you haven't figured out, yes, she is very strong in Al-Anon, and she just called it the way it was. So those next 5 years, I really made a conscious effort of working the steps. I got up each morning. I read the big book. I said a prayer. I do a little meditation. And I started working steps 1, 2, and 3 before I ever got up out of my cell. And over the next couple of years as it went, I started working with other guys in the prison and in the program that were going to AA. And I realized I needed to do steps 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, and 11 every single morning before those cell doors opened if I need to have a good start to my day. And I started working the program hard. And I started trying to live it. And I started trying to make it a part of my life. And before those 5 years was up, I would wake up in the morning, I'd look in the mirror in that cell, and I actually started liking who I saw. I thought, that guy is not that bad. And I started finding some positive in my life. My mother passed away. I was able to make amends to her, and I'm extremely grateful for that. Was able to go up for another parole hearing. Lasted about 10 minutes. They said, we'll see you in 2 years. And I realized at that point in time, you know what? I'll get out when I'm supposed to get out. Got through those next 2 years, and I went up for that third hearing, and that third hearing might have been probably one of the most difficult things in my entire life. They talked about things that I didn't even know that I had done, that they knew I had done in my childhood. They laid pictures of my father out on the table for me to see of what I had done. I was in there for a little over 40 minutes. It took them 64 days to give me an answer. And they said, Mr. Huff, we'll see you in 2 more years. But I was good with that. Because if I would have got out that first time when I wanted to get out, I didn't have the foundation of AA. I didn't have the foundation of this program. And I would have gone out and screwed up, stumbled, been back to using and drinking. And I would have probably put myself right back in prison. Went up that 4th time. I was granted parole. And I went home on October 3rd, 2008. I spent 21 years to the day in prison. Now, in the state of Missouri, back when I was sentenced to 2 lives, you're supposed to do 15 years on each. So I should have done 30 years. And I will tell anybody once again, there is nothing that I did to get out of prison early. I give all the credit to my higher power in this program of AA that opened them doors to allow me to walk out. Now, when I walked out in 2008, you all have to understand the world did not exist the way it was. I came out, there wasn't cell phones when I went to prison. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't Google. There wasn't Siri. There was none of this. I was in a world where I did not exist. I did not know how to exist. The first ride home, when Debbie picked me up and took me home, I looked over, she's driving 60 and it felt like we was doing 112. I had been walking for 21 years and I was in a car and it couldn't even handle that. Got out October 3rd on that Friday. I always assumed that most people figured out that since we hadn't been together in 21 years, that everybody left us alone that Friday night and we was together. Saturday morning, 10 a.m., knock on the door. I'm freaking out. Who's coming to knock on the door? 2 men showed up. They said, are you Brent? I said, yes. They said, Harold L. told us to pick you up and take you to an AA meeting. I went to my first meeting in less than 24 hours when I got out. That Monday, less than 72 hours later, I learned right then that everybody in the world in AA was crazier than I was, because a man had a 6-month-old baby daughter. He invited me to his home, fixed me a steak dinner, and took me to an AA meeting. And I'm sitting here thinking, who in their right mind would invite a convicted murderer into their home with a 6-month-old child to feed him a dinner and take him home? I asked him a few years later, and he said, people told me you were doing what you're supposed to do. You just got out. He goes, I was just trying to keep you on the right path. And I started learning real quick that people in AA taught me what friendship was about. Those people that I drank with, those people that I gave my family up with because I wanted to be with them come the 4th of July or on Thanksgiving or on New Year's Eve, and I didn't want to be with my family because I wanted to be with them. Not a one of them ever come to visit me when I was in prison. AA taught me what real true friendship and fellowship is all about. I got out in October. My sponsor told me, whenever you ask to speak, you're going to speak and share your story. So on October 30th, I had not even been out a month. He set me up to where I had to share my story. Now, the first time I shared my story, I was in a cold sweat. I was dripping. My shirt was soaking wet. I probably talked about 15 minutes, have no idea what I said. It was the night before Halloween. There's a party going on. Half the people had costumes on out there. I couldn't even know what they were. It's like talking to a bear and this and that. And when I got done, I knew right then there was not one person going to accept me for finding out what my crime was. And when I got done speaking that night, every single person in that church basement lined up to shake my hand and give me a hug or say something to me. And once again, I started learning what this fellowship, this program is truly about. For whatever reason, I'm not going to explain to anybody because I don't know myself. I grew up in Missouri, and for whatever reason, I didn't want to watch the Cardinals as a football team. I fell in love with the Miami Dolphins back in the 70s with Kick and Zonka and all of them. So one of the guys in AA who actually brought that program in those 15 weeks got 4 tickets because at that point in time, Miami was playing the Rams in St. Louis. He said, here's 4 tickets, take whoever you want to go and go to the game and enjoy. So I took my sponsor. I took a gentleman named Bob S., who I did 16 years with. I took another guy named Gary, who had done 20 years. We went to a meeting at the Lindell Club, grabbed breakfast, and we went down to the game. And at halftime, this lady behind us said, I just got to say something. She goes, you 4 are laughing and screaming and carrying on and having such a great time, and none of you are drinking. She goes, it's probably a good thing, because if you all were drinking and carrying on like this, some of you would end up in jail. Little did she know I did 21 years, Gary did 20, and Bob did 16. So there's 57 years of people in prison sitting in front of her. And we laughed about that. We still laugh about that today. I'll tell another real quick story here. My wife told me I need to go downstairs and go through a couple of boxes. Well, I thought they were like to my mom's and my grandma's stuff. And I was like, I'm just absolutely not ready for that. And she said, no, it's not. You just need to go down there and go through some boxes. So I went down in the basement, and there was just these 2 huge shipping boxes down there, and they had gifts in them. And I started looking at the gifts, and it said, Happy Father's Day, 2003. Merry Christmas, 1999. Happy Birthday, 2005. The reason I tell you this is there was not one gift in those 2 boxes before 1996 when I went to my first AA meeting. Everything in there, everything I have in my life today is a gift of this program. Got out. I could not get any human being in the world to hire me. I got turned down over 400 times. I couldn't get a fast food place to hire me, a gas station, Quick Trip. No one would hire me. I shared my story one night, and a gentleman came up to me afterwards and he said, "Do you really need a job?" I said, "Yeah." And he handed me his card. He said, "Come see me in the morning at 10 a.m. I went to see him, hired me right there on the spot. Worked for him for a little over 2 years, ended up getting hurt. They put a plate in my neck. I couldn't really do the lifting and everything. And I shook his hand. We parted ways. And it's just, there's no way I could work for him and do that job anymore. So once again, being the alcoholic, I was panicking. How am I going to get a job? I'm still trying to heal myself. What am I going to do? It was Thanksgiving weekend, and one of the gentlemen who actually brought the program into prison had moved away, but he was back visiting family. And I was telling him what was going on. He said, "No problem." He said, "Here, give this man a call." He goes, "I'll let him know you're going to reach out." So it took me a couple of days to get a hold of him. I got a hold of him, went for an interview. He said, "Give me 2 or 3 days and I'll give you a call back one way or the other." Man called me back, offered me a job. I've been working for that man since 2010. I started out as a porter in the dealership. I've worked my way up to sales. I worked my way up to finance, sales manager. Now I'm a GSM of a car dealership. All of this is because of what AA gave me an opportunity and opened me a door for. I don't know how I am on time, but those in-laws that really didn't want me to marry their daughter again and be part of their family, it came to Thanksgiving, it came to Christmas, instead of them shutting the door and going, "Oh my God, the guy's pulled up in the driveway, how drunk is he," and all this, they started opening that door and they started welcoming me in. They started being happy I was part of the family. We started going to Cardinals games together as a family. My father-in-law, I still visit him to this day, and him and I will carry on and have great conversations. It's like I had a family, a second chance all over again. That lady that I told you about that came back in my life and stuck with me for 13 years till I got out, she ended up passing away in May of 20. Might have been probably one of the most difficult times in my life. And the fellowship of this program surrounded me with such love and such support. It was incredible. This was right in the thick of COVID. People were not having open meetings. I had been asked to speak in Baltimore, Maryland, and had totally forgot all about it. My phone went off 2 hours before I was supposed to. She passed away at 10 in the morning. Phone went off at 3 that afternoon that I was supposed to speak at night. And I was just like, "Oh my God, there's absolutely no way I can do this. I've got to get a hold of this guy and apologize. Like, he's going to understand." Both of my daughters immediately said, "No, you will share your story tonight." She said, "You're sitting here in this house and Mom took you back because of this program. And you're going to do whatever you need to do tonight if you made that commitment." So I shared my story that night and really have no clue what I said. But I know one thing: there's 2 people in my phone book right now from that meeting that we stay in touch with every year. I'm a grandfather today. My girls are proud of me. They're not ashamed of me. I have a job today. I have a life today. I have gifts in my life that I probably really do not deserve. But everything I have in my life is for one reason and one reason only. Because I admitted I was an alcoholic, and I came to this room and I humbled myself and started working these steps. And I work them in 24-hour increments. Now, do I stumble and do I fall? Oh, yeah. I'm an alcoholic. But I also take step 10 and I ask for forgiveness, and I try to make it amends on a daily basis. And I try to do the best that I can. I'll tell you one more quick story here and I'll be quiet. You know, step 8 and step 9, we have to make amends. My sponsor told me to write down the people I need to make amends on a 5x7 card, keep a stack on them and go through them. If you get to the point you can't do with that one at that time, put it to the back and wait till it comes up again. Well, I kept doing that, kept doing it, and this one kept coming up every time, and it was my father. So I didn't know how to make it amends to him. So my sponsor told me to write a letter. We went to the cemetery and I read the letter. I truly believe in my heart that my dad accepts me today and has forgiven me. And I try to live today the best I can, so he knows that I'm actually trying to do the best that I can to the best of my ability. And that's by working these steps each and every morning that I wake up. The easiest way for me to explain to any of you how I try to live my life is this. When I was the good alcoholic out ripping, roaring, doing everything, I was driving that car and I had both hands on the wheel and I was in the ditch and I was going the wrong way and I was all over the road. Now that I'm in AA, I sit in the passenger seat and I let my higher power, who I choose to call God, drive. I don't get there as fast as I want because I still want instant gratification, but he gets me there when I'm supposed to get there. And as soon as I start getting selfish and I reach over and grab that steering wheel, that car heads right back off in that ditch again. And when I let go and I sit back in that seat and I let him take control, things happen when they're supposed to happen. And my life today is happening the way it's supposed to, as long as I stay in that passenger seat. Thank you all for listening to me.